Countdown.
Hello, everybody. We are live.
Hi.
And let us know what you think about our new backgrounds. We've been experimenting with new backgrounds. They're moving backgrounds, but we don't want to be distracting. But I think they're kind of cool though. So I don't know. Give us a facelift or something like that. Thank you and welcome to our stream. I think we have a really great live stream for you guys today. This is our second installment of cults versus cults, comparing the XJW cult to other cults. We have ex-Amish person from an Amish community today, ex-Amish community today, ex-Mormon, and we even have an ex-Mormon bishop that was excommunicated. So that should be interesting today. If you have any questions or you want to join the live stream with questions or comments, go ahead and do that. We'll put the link in the comments below. And make sure you share the stream. I'm actually doing that right now. You know, I have to do that live on for Periscope, which is just so annoying. So we can make sure that we get all our followers on Twitter. Give me 1 second here. Did you share the stream, Molly?
Oh, I did.
You did. What about you, Emma? Did you share the screen?
Oh, I shared it to about 10 groups earlier.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You did say that, didn't you?
Excuse the like obnoxious street life happening. I don't know why. And I just
Are you saying right now?
just a second ago, yeah, there was an idiot like revving his motorcycle up right in the road.
Well, you know what? I like to say that the application that we use is experiencing some issues with sound issues. So if you hear any sound issues, let us know. We'll try to adjust it midstream. So I guess we can go ahead and get started by bringing on our guests. Hello, Mary.
Hello.
Mary was on our last stream on the cults versus cult, the part 1. So was Cal. Hey, Cal.
How do you do?
And our special guest today, we have Sam Young who's also an ex-Mormon, and this is the ex-Mormon bishop. We get to hear your story today. How you doing, Sam?
I'm doing great, and to all the Hungarian women out there, I just want to say, Keze Chokolon.
I did not know.
What does that translate to, Molly, our expert?
It's like very formal, very traditional greeting, especially from men to women. It literally means like kisses on your hand, because in the last century it was a very typical greeting to kiss women on the hand when they met men.
Hello, everybody from Facebook and from YouTube. I was worried about whether or not we was gonna get our YouTubers today. Look like you guys are showing up here. So why don't we go ahead and get started? So Sam, why don't we start with you? Why don't you, because at last live stream, we were able to give our stories and talk about a little bit about why we left our last cult. Why don't you give us some information or let us know what made you leave? And well, you didn't get a really good exit, right?
You didn't get a choice, really.
Right.
Okay, so I didn't leave by my own will. I was kicked out of the Mormon church by excommunication. So although I'd lost my belief in the truth claims a couple of years prior to that, I had decided to stay in the church. I'd raised all of my children, 6 children, 14 grandchildren, my wife, all of them were still in the church. And so I decided to stay in the church. It was my community that I've built over the past previous 40 years. So I have tons of friends. But you want me to go into the whole thing right now?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay.
We're all ears.
So I'm sitting here in Texas today, but I was raised in Utah, raised in the Mormon church, did all the Mormon milestones, receiving the priesthood at age 12, going on a mission at age 19 for 2 years to Guatemala and El Salvador, coming home and getting married in the temple. That's a highly important thing, by the way, just for all your listeners to know. You can't get into heaven unless you get married in the Mormon temple. So anyway, I got married in the Mormon temple. That's their belief. Okay. Not my belief. Anyway, but it was. Married in the Mormon temple, moved to Texas after college at BYU, 4 years, graduated college, moved to Texas. And this is where I met my wife, who is Mormon. Anyway, I was very faithful in the church. In fact, the church was my number one priority. I served in all the responsibilities. I dedicated tons of time. I paid all my money, all the 10% of your income, plus a bunch of other stuff. I eventually became bishop. Not that you aspire to any of these positions, but maybe we kind of do hope you'll get to serve, because it is an honor to serve as a bishop. So I served as a bishop from 1991 to 1995. Now, bishop sounds like a highfalutin responsibility, right? Well, it kind of is. For 5 years, you're in charge of a congregation. There were 600 to 700 names on the rolls of our congregation. We may have had 150 to 200 people come to church every week, and you're kind of the shepherd of the congregation. So I did that for 5 years, which is the typical length of time that Mormon bishops serve. And after that, I served in all kinds of other responsibilities in the Mormon church. In 2017, I found out something. Well, I'd heard about it, but I really hadn't paid much attention until a close friend of mine told me why he was no longer attending church. And he said this, and his kids are about the age my kids are. My kids are all late 20s, 30s, 40s at this point. But back in 2017, my kids that were his kids' age were now 25, 26 years old. Anyway, he told me that he quit going to church because one day his son came home and said, the bishop wants to meet with me. Now, he was 13 years at this point in time. Now, I served as a bishop. I know how that works. Every 6 months, the youth from now it's age 11. When I was in there, it was age 12 to 18 or to 17, are to be interviewed behind closed doors by the head of the congregation. So that was me. So you'd call them in, you'd talk to them about things and how they're doing, and hopefully give them some counsel with regards to spiritual things and try to uplift them. Well, this friend of mine in 2017 said that he quit attending church because when his son went in here for his first interview, his dad said, look, don't worry about it. I'll sit out on the couch in the hallway. Anything happens, you just walk out. I'm right there. Well, his son goes into the interview. A few minutes later, his son rushes out, white-faced, and tells his dad this, Dad, the bishop asked me if I masturbate and if I have sex with other boys. Now, his dad, I'm kind of a mild-mannered little guy. His dad is one of those imposing people that you don't want to mess with. He's my friend, but he's one of those guys. He served behind the lines in Cambodia during the Vietnam War. He was a police officer. Anyway, he just was pretty imposing, intimidating. Well, he walked into that bishop's office and he leaned over the desk and he said, if you ever ask my sons, he had 2 sons, a question like that again, I will beat you to a pulp. Well, rather than take that any more chances, he just quit coming to church. So I'm hearing this 10, 12 years after the fact. So I asked one of my girls if she had ever been asked that question, sexual questions. And she said, yes, Dad, when I was 12. She's 25 or 6 at this point. She said, yes, Dad, when I was 12, I was asked if I masturbated. I didn't know what, by the way, can I say words like that on this program? I should be able to, because many of the Mormon kids, they face that question behind closed doors. Anyway, she said, yes, Dad, I was asked. I didn't know what it meant. So I went to the internet. I asked my friends. None of them knew what it meant. So I looked it up online. I Googled it. Well, guess what happens when you Google masturbate? Well, she said, I found out what it was, how to do it, and I found pornography at age 12. So I asked her, well, were you ever asked that question again? And she said, yes, all the time while she was a youth. Now, okay, I can say those kind of words. God damn it, that made me so mad to hear that my child was asked that question, those questions for all this time when I'm an active member of the church, paying all this money in the church, all this time serving. I served as 5 years as bishop, and I should have known this was happening. But my child, I asked her, why didn't you tell me you were asked these questions? She said, Dad, I thought you knew what was going on. I thought you approved of what was being asked me. That made me feel really bad. It made my wife feel really guilty and shamed that our child didn't have confidence that she could object to us as her parents, that we approved of it. Well, I've got grandkids now in the crosshairs of these filthy, despicable interviews that occur in the Mormon church. So I talked to my local leaders about it, that we need to change this. They responded, there's no problem. Okay, fine. I put it out on the internet. I asked the question, does this happen to anybody else? I was flooded by stories on the internet. Not only did it happen to thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. All I know is I got thousands of stories that just made you bawl at what happened to these kids as they were asked these sexually explicit questions, and just horrendous questions that shamed the children, that caused many children to turn to drugs, to quit studying. They felt worthless. Their self-worth was gone. This asking sexual explicit questions, and let's see, is it like 95% of boys masturbate? So the kids are faced with, do I lie about it? At least 50% of the boys lie about that. Well, good for them, I would say today. Good for you. But I don't know what percentage of the girls masturbate, but I know it's a substantial percentage. I asked my daughter, did you ever lie about it? She says, yes, Dad, just like all the other kids lied about it. Well, good for her, but she was subjected to that. But it causes all kinds of problems in people's lives, up to suicide ideation. It's like 80% of the kids reported suicide ideation because they were having these bishops' interviews where they're being shamed. Suicide attempt, over 50% of the kids attempted suicide over these interviews. And some kids actually, we've got records of some kids actually committing suicide. Died by suicide. I'm sorry I said that. There are numerous kids that have died by suicide because of the shame they experienced as children in those bishops' offices. So anyway, I started collecting all these stories. I put up a petition. In 2 months, the petition was that the Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, stop one-on-one interviews and stop asking sexual questions. It was only those two asks, change the policy. I thought it was a no-brainer. Everybody in the world would agree with this. Well, it turns out everybody in the world except Mormons agreed with this. So we gathered all these stories. I printed them in a book. And there are 15 main leaders in Salt Lake City. I printed 15 books of these stories that many people say they can read 3 or 4 of them, but then they want to throw up at how badly our children were affected. And we held a march and a rally in Salt Lake City in 2018, March 30th, 2018. It was a wonderful, wonderful event. It gave validation to so many people that had been harmed, adults who had been harmed as children. Finally, somebody is standing up to speak out for them that they were wronged as children. And it wasn't their fault what happened to them. And all the bad decisions they made afterwards are understandable when you've been shamed, humiliated over these, with these kind of questions. We delivered those books. The church actually changed their policy. And this is the change they made in their policy as a result. So you're talking to somebody who actually made a difference in the church changing their policy. And the policy change they made is that there could be another adult in the interviews if the child requested it. Now, I read that as what an idiotic response. What 12-year-old is going to know that there's danger in that office? They could ask me how many fingers I used to masturbate. They could ask me they could ask me after I made out with my boyfriend, where did he ejaculate? Exactly where did he ejaculate? How many times did you reach an orgasm? I mean, these kind of questions are so horrendous. Adults don't talk about these things, but Mormon bishops talk about them with kids, with children. You cowardly Mormon bishops that do that. Anyway, children. I'm sorry, my emotion is coming out here.
It's definitely warranted.
Anyway, so they changed that policy, and although I viewed it as a stupid response, they ought to ban the questions and ban the one-on-one interviews totally. But the headlines across the world, not just in Salt Lake City, but across the country and even across the world, they stated that the headline said, Mormon Church now allows other adults in interviews. Something like that. And I thought, okay, well, there's big caveats on that. The child has to request it. And the church isn't announcing this policy change. But at least that sent the message to a whole bunch of members that, okay, I'm going to be in that interview with my child. So it did some good things to alert many parents about that. But the full change hadn't happened. So in August of 2018, I went up to Salt Lake City for 23 days, over 3 weeks, and I went without food. I fasted. I did a hunger strike in front of the Salt Lake Temple. The Salt Lake Temple, that's right at the heart, the headquarters of Salt Lake City. That is the symbol of their church, that Mormon temple, the Salt Lake Temple. And anyway, for 23 days, I went without food. Now, I lost 35 pounds over that period of time. I gained all of it and more back, unfortunately. But during that time, every night across from Temple Square, we had a podcast, or not a podcast, a Facebook live stream. And over that 23 days, we had over 500,000 people view the stream. The news was doing coverage all the time. So we got massive awareness to this issue, not just the issue of Mormon children behind closed doors, but the issue of sex abuse generally. When you take a child, when it is policy that you're supposed to take a child behind closed doors, guess what? There are pedophilic Mormon bishops, just like there are in every single religion has problems with this. But then when you institutionalize the one-on-one access by Mormon leaders to children, you compound the problem. And sure enough, there's tons of stories of sex abuse by Mormon bishops. There have been tons of Mormon bishops that have been convicted of sex abuse of the children that he was put in charge of. But it also grooms the kids that it's okay to talk to any Mormon leader behind closed doors. So it facilitates all kinds of bad things. So anyway, for 23 days, massive awareness. Now, in the meantime, the Mormon church wouldn't talk to me. None of the leadership in the Mormon church, the high leadership, was willing to engage me whatsoever, except for 2 weeks later. They sent me a letter saying that they were calling a disciplinary council. That's a nice word of saying we're holding a court on you to determine whether or not you are worthy to be a member of the church anymore. I went to that church, and it just so many weird things about that. You could bring witnesses, but my wife came, who's still a member of the church, and she talked about, for 15 minutes, she talked about was a witness for me and talked about what my intent was and so on. And then for my 45 minutes, rather than defend me, because I didn't think there was going to be any, they're not going to, I mean, they didn't even tell me what the charges were or what the evidence was before I got there. Okay, what's the evidence that I've done something wrong? But I just decided I'm going to speak up for the children. That's what I'm going to spend my 45 minutes, is speak up for the children, share the children's stories, the adults' stories of when they were children, and let those 15 men that sat there that were going to judge me, let them plainly hear what their church has done to so many of their children. Well, the end result of that was, well, actually, what they do, the notification of the trial happens with two people showing up at your door from the church, high leaders. And these were friends of mine. I invited them in. They gave me my letter. I knew what they were there for. And the letter was to be excommunicated, or to have the trial. Well, after the trial, the same thing happened. They showed up at my doorstep and gave me the letter. I didn't open the letter at that point in time. I decided I wanted to open it up in front of the world. I want the world to know what the Mormons' response is to someone standing up to protect children. So I scheduled a news conference, flew to Salt Lake, and by that time, I don't know, I'd had so many news conferences. The first news conference I ever had, I was nervous as all get out. But at this point, I knew what news conferences were all about, and knew a lot of the people in the media. So there were like 200 people that showed up to supporters to hear what the verdict was. All the news stations in Salt Lake City, national news showed up, the AP showed up, and I opened my letter in front of the cameras and read it, and the verdict was they were excommunicating me. They didn't state this, but they basically excommunicated me for standing up to object to a policy that had done incalculable harm to tens of thousands of children. So that's my story, how I ended up outside of the Mormon church.
Thank you so much, Sam, for sharing that with us. Did you have something you wanted to say? I'm sorry, Cal.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention to Sam here. I brought this up the last time that I was asked on this show, but that friend I was telling you about, the one I lived with, the one that was unfortunately molested, and then her attacker was allowed to serve a mission. I do have some notes here, and yeah, she was asked the same things you were talking about. Specifically, she mentioned that the law of chastity, when she was asked about that. And it's my understanding that some bishops will just say, "Are you conforming to the law of chastity?" When she was asked, it was broken down into like 5 or 6 questions, all including, virginity, orientation, masturbation, stuff like that. And, it's unfortunately super common. I'm not sure where your congregation was at the time, but, this was here in southern Utah, where everyone knows everyone, and you can kind of get away with stuff like that a little easier, I reckon.
Well, I think that'll segue us to our next. Looks like we lost Sam there. What our former cult's views on the handling of child sex abuse. Before we go to that, I'd like to say that the intrusive questioning, in judicial or kangaroo court, I call it, type settings that some religious institutions employ. Namely, seems like cults do this. Ex-Jehovah's Witness organization, as well as the Mormon organization, put their members on trial for various different reasons. I have to say that when it comes to matters of sexuality, that the Jehovah's Witnesses are just as intrusive. When it comes to some of the questioning, you can go in any one of our groups, ex-Jehovah's Witness groups, and hear story after story upon story of someone telling about them being in a judicial meeting or a setting where they're being judged by the elders of their church, and they are asked disgusting questions I mean, I can definitely vouch for that because if I've gone through the process. Anybody that has gone through the process can vouch that actually happens in the ex-Jehovah's Witness, or that in Jehovah's Witness organization. And I just wanted to ask you, Mary, because I don't think we got to this last time on our last train about what your cult, because you're ex-Amish, right? How they handle child
Right.
sex abuse.
Not very well. They're, well, when I was 18, I had already been baptized, and so they have this whole thing of like much similar to the Mormons. Like Sam said, they have two men that come out and they talk to the person. Usually it's a minister and a deacon, because that's their job. So it'll be one of the three ministers and a deacon, and then they also have a bishop. But anyway, so they discuss it and they put it in front of the church. And then they go around and they ask each member of the church to do what is called the rote. While you are not present, you're not even allowed to defend yourself in front of the church or say anything about it. They just put it in front of the church, and people will bring up other things that you need to confess for. And then the church votes. However, comma, pause. As a woman, I don't know why they ever ask a woman to actually give their rote, because your rote is supposed to align with the man that is in charge of your life, basically. And so then after they've taken their rote, they'll bring the person that they're talking about back to the church, put them on their knees in front of the entire church, and have them give this confession, which I still to this day remember the exact words, because I've done it. I was one of those. But I sat there and I listened to a 17-year-old girl confess that she sinned because she enticed somebody to rape her. And so that is typical of the Amish response. Currently in the news, there is another situation where there is a 13-year-old Amish girl that is pregnant with her rapist's child. And you don't really see anything about the community doing anything. What you do see is you see the non-Amish community, the prosecutor, in the case of her rapist, is pretty much aligning himself with the rapist and protecting them. And the girl is still living with the rapist. And I just find that utterly unacceptable. You do now have, 16 years after I've been nonconforming, you do now have some more liberal bishops who will report sexual assault. And I know of one case in particularly where there was this elderly man who had been spending his entire life molesting and sexually abusing children, and the bishop reported it, and he got sentenced to pretty much the rest of his life in prison, as opposed to this case last week. So it varies among communities on how they react to it. I've also sat in church, which, by the way, I just committed a sin by telling you church business. I also know a woman that had 14 children and then went to church and confessed that she did not uphold her marriage bed properly in front of the entire church. And I can't count how many people have went to church and confessed after they got married that they had premarital sex. That is a very common thing that they confess to.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. I don't know if you wanted to share it on the stream, but I know you said there was a recent case of an Amish girl being was it assaulted or raped?
Raped.
And you are taking action. You're actually going to advocate or talk to the prosecutor, right, of that case?
I have contacted the prosecutor's office. I am waiting for them to call me back because I'm trying to share some educational material with them, because there needs to be a better response to that. This is not okay. Don't sit there and blame the victim. Don't sit there and make them sit there and live in that house. Like, personally, when I was a child and I was being sexually assaulted, every time I brought it up and they did some kind of action, I wouldn't say it was necessarily like a judicial action, but kind of probably. But they would have like the shunning or the bon and midong that they did. It basically made things worse because I was still living in the house with them. The threats that they used to control you and keep you silent became worse. Some of them were like, I will kill you, I will kill myself, I will kill everybody, I will do this, I will do that, like just all kinds of threatening things. And so there's a lot of like victim shaming that goes on, but there's also a lot of manipulation and control that comes from the patriarchal communities like that.
Well, if you are just joining us, we are talking about this is our second installment of cults versus cults. And as you can see, there are 3 cults being represented today, right? The Mormon Church, as well as Jehovah's Witness and the Amish Church. And we're talking about our former cult's view on the handling of child sex abuse. If you have followed us, you know that we have done, actually, I would say a couple live streams that included the Jehovah's Witness, how Jehovah's Witnesses handle child sex abuse. But did one of us on the panel want to say briefly, give a brief overview for those who are not familiar with the Jehovah's Witnesses handling of child sex abuse? Emma or Molly?
I don't mind either.
Go ahead, Emma.
Yeah, well, basically, they go by 2 witness rule to believe that it's happened to start with. So actually, in the policies, they say 2 or 3. So that means that somebody has literally got to abuse a child in front of 2 other people. And then if it gets taken to the elders, they are instructed in the elders manual to ring the branch office, not the police, the branch office, to find out whether it's mandatory to report in whatever country they're in. And even if it is, it still doesn't generally get reported. And then if there is the witnesses, the elders will do an internal spiritual investigation. If the abuser confesses but repents, which is basically just say sorry, then they can be allowed to remain in the congregation. They might get reproved, which that's just announced to the congregation, but not the reasons why. So those people with children, they generally won't know that they're sitting next to a child rapist. They won't know that they're having them in their homes. The Watchtower in May, actually 2019, had like a study on this. So the witnesses all went through these policies, so they all know about it. And it stated that members with minors may be told basically what this abuser has done. If they do get disfellowshipped, quite often there's a high percentage that get let back into the congregation. And they will do something that they call remove their privileges, which basically means that they can't carry a microphone around in the meeting, they can't work the sound departments, they can't give talks from the platform. So that's their idea of punishment for raping children. They used to make it so the children had to sit in the same room as their abuser and be interviewed by 3 elders. And they have recently changed it. I think they've released literally like 3 new elders manuals in about a year and a half. And they've updated the section now where they've said that the child doesn't have to sit with their abuser anymore. So I'm not sure whether that still takes place or not. But I can't think if I've missed anything.
I mean, if I may mention about the child sex abuse handling, is that I actually went out of my way to go to the Kingdom Hall and actually managed to speak to an elder, which they are a bit less intimidating than like Mormon bishops sound. I mean, in my opinion, they are like just from my knowledge of the the religious structure, like bishops are kind of the top dogs in like the Mormon church, but elders are not really the top dogs of the organization. So you still have like a bit of leeway with that. But I went and actually managed by sheer dumb luck. I was just bored, walked down the street, saw Jehovah's Witnesses. I walked up. One of them turned out to be the wife of the elder of my old congregation. So I went and I was like, please don't recognize me. I haven't been here in like 8 years. Don't recognize me. Just don't. At least not until I ask my questions. And basically it ended up being like a 3-hour conversation about child sex abuse and how they handle it. And he insisted that because it's a very sensitive case, they will only allow the elders to handle it and proceed with it. But at the same time, it's the parent's responsibility to report it to the authorities. So I asked, what if the parent is abusing the child? He did not answer. And then, I kept asking these questions and I actually recorded it, but my phone decided that, never mind, I'm going to delete that voice recording, even though that would have been very useful for me. But anyway. And basically the point he was making was, it's the biblical standards to have at least 2 witnesses in any kind of like abuse situation, and that anytime the parents can and may report to the police if they so feel like. But it's not like they are really advised to do that, and they do as the elders say. Like, I witnessed Jehovah's Witness elder was my adoptive father, and he abused his wife to the point of like her miscarrying, and all he got for it was like,
well, speaking
bad
of
elder.
church discipline, I
Basically,
think
that was
Mary,
it.
you
And
said that the punishment for the rapist is generally the same as the one for the victim.
Correct. If it's handled by the bishop and the ministers and the deacon, it generally is the same or very similar. There may be a shunning, which may happen for like a period of 6 weeks, and then they call that the bon and meeting. They are not allowed to sit down and eat with anybody, and then you're supposed to forgive them. And their definition of forgiveness is pretty much you don't talk about it, you don't think about it. It's as if it never happened because they have been forgiven by God.
And that's pretty similar because even within the Jehovah's Witness religion, the Jehovah's Witness religion, there are countless examples of victims who come forward and they are shunned or kicked out or given almost the same discipline or even harsher as the alleged abuser.
So in my case, like 16 years ago, I actually went out of the community. I was not shunned immediately. They tried to contact me until I ended up calling the sheriff's department to have them stop harassing me because they would not stop calling me. And I had written them a letter and advised them of like, this is why I'm not being a part of your church anymore. And so what had happened is pretty much a while after I had probably like 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks after that, I went to answer the phone one day, and here's one of my rapists calling me at a place where I kind of finally felt safe for the first time in my life. And the only option that I had was to report it because there was no way that anybody was going to do anything about the situation. And I reported it, and there was a whole investigation. During which, when everything went down in the courtroom, like my community, my family, everybody I ever knew showed up and supported and testified for my rapists. And let's just say that I've never felt so abandoned in my life.
I'm so sorry.
However, what came out of that is that it kind of opened up a door a little bit for people to talk about what happens. And I have met so many people who were born Amish and who were sexually assaulted, and they've never felt able or safe to report it. Because even after that, so there was a lot of people that were very angry at the Amish community for all of the things that happened and how they handled it. And so the community shunned me. I am an Apgangana. And for the entire time that I stayed in the local area, within an hour or two, they harassed me through the legal system until I ended up moving away. And even then, when I went back to visit, like 2 years later, I was still questioned in regards to my whereabouts because they claimed that I was doing things to their community. One, I never did those things. And two, I wasn't even there. So, I mean, meanwhile, my rapists are full-fledged members of the community and accepted and supported. So that's kind of gives you an example of what happens or what can happen.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Mary. We have a comment in the audience saying that they're proud of you. Thank you so much. I know that for trusting our platform to be able to share that and for sharing that. Before we move on, I know we want to do our question and answer session a little later, but this seems kind of relevant rather. David is asking whether or not there is a 2-witness rule that is for child sex abuse in the Mormon Church. I'm looking for the comment to flash across the screen.
Yeah, I was reading that when it came up.
Yeah.
Man, not to my knowledge, no, because the problem, and probably get some confirmation here, but one of the kind of strange things about the Mormon Church is it's Andrea kind of talked about this last time, but it's kind of separate in the church. So you get things that the leadership will say at the very, very, very top of the ladder, the prophet and his quorums. They'll say things, and then it's kind of up to each individual congregation as to how they're going to go ahead and interpret that. And I know that my ward, I had never heard of anything like that. It was more, there wasn't a whole lot of sex abuse in my area, at least not that was reported, not that I ever heard about. But as far as I know, no, they haven't instituted anything like that, short of, what he was saying about being able to bring an extra into the room. But as for witnesses to the crime, no, I never heard anything like that.
So that sounds like that's unique to the Jehovah's Witnesses, perhaps.
Yeah.
Sam, I know you open. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
I was just going to go to you.
Respond to that. No, there is no. First of all, until maybe this year, the policies that a bishop is to follow have been super secret. They weren't to be shared with anybody. Maybe the counselors in the bishopric, but the stake president and the bishop received these holy instructions that weren't supposed to be shared with anybody. Now, it doesn't talk about a 2-witness rule to child sex abuse, but here's what it does require. And when I was a bishop, and we're going back a long time, 25, 30 years ago, this policy gave me great comfort. But now as I look back, it is a horrendous policy because I know the purpose of the policy. The policy is this: if someone comes in and discusses child sex abuse or confesses to child sex abuse or is a victim of any child sex abuse thing, you call Salt Lake City immediately. They give you an 800 number and say they will guide you through the process. And I was thinking, I don't know. I'm not trained. None of the Mormon leaders are trained in anything. You're just a normal guy off the street. You got to have a job, and you might be the plumber, you might be the dentist. In my case, I was a small business owner. And so you're not trained in how to handle any of this stuff, but it comes in your door. Fortunately for me, child abuse only came once. But you were told to call this 800 number. Well, that 800 number goes to the lawyers, the church lawyers. It goes to a law firm. And now I understand the purpose of that call is not to protect the child. In fact, the policy has now been released, and they reiterate it this year because there's been a lot of advertisements about if you've been abused in the Mormon church or by the scouts, call this 800 number. They've reiterated that no Mormon leader should ever participate in police investigations or be witnesses in any trials. So if you know about something bad, you're told, don't go to the police and don't be a witness or anything. So the policy, the main concern about the Mormon church is protect the good name of the church. In fact, they told me as I was starting to speak up, I met with my direct line leader, and he said, the regional leader, he said, Sam, you better shut up. He didn't say those words. You better stop talking to the media, or we're going to have to protect the good name of the church. And I look at protect the good name of the church. Who cares about the good name of the church? That should be way down the list. Protecting our children should be number one on the list. But it turns out protecting the church, the good name, hell, they don't have any good name with me or with many other people, but protect the good name of the church is number one. So you call that 800 number so the church lawyers can get ahead of this deal and silence the victim or blame the victim or dredge up bad information about the victim. So if they go public, they can protect themselves and silence that poor victim. So there's no two-witness rule, but there is a rule: give the lawyers a heads up so they can protect the church.
That's very similar to the Jehovah's Witnesses in that they have a central way of handling child sex abuse, and that you have to don't correct me if I'm wrong, but you have to report it to a department before you actually report it to the police, if they do it then. Because they've been caught in Australia alone over thousands of cases of which they weren't reporting when they actually should be reporting child sex abuse. So that sounds very familiar, that the Jehovah's Witnesses engage in similar tactics of trying to shut the person down or the person accusing down before they can actually make it to the papers or make it to the police or anything like that. So that's very similar. I know we've been on child sex abuse handling. If you are not familiar with Jehovah's Witnesses child sex abuse handling, I just want to refer you to one of our last live streams, because I want to give the ex-Amish and the ex-Mormons the floor here. So we have a lot of information on our channels if you want to know about the handling of child sex abuse in our cult. But I'm going to move on to, in particular, you, Sam, have you answer this question, because we all answered this question last week, but just for you, that your excommunication, I think we talked beforehand, did not also include a shunning in which no one, they were instructed not to talk to you, but they are doing a light shunning where they're not really communicating with you, right?
Yeah, there is no shunning policy where they can't be in contact with me. In fact, they're supposed to reach out and bring back the excommunicated member to the church. Okay, excommunication is supposed to be not long-term, not forever. Well, I can tell you, not one single leader of the church has ever made a peep towards me. In effect, there is shunning. There is formal shunning from things in the church. For example, I can't say a prayer in the church. If my mother was to pass away and we were to have a funeral in the church, I couldn't share my feelings about my mom. I couldn't say a prayer there. So you can't really, I can't participate in the sacrament. So in the Mormon church, bread and water are passed to the membership. So I've been to church twice since I was excommunicated. And the first time, it's boys that hold the priesthood. So they're a lot more powerful than any girl in the world that doesn't have the priesthood. They walk up and down the aisles with the bread and then with the water. And they literally walk past me. So they have been informed, do not even offer this to the guy. Well, the next time I went to church, they didn't do that. I was rebellious. I'll go to hell. I partook of the bread and water.
Good for you, you rebel.
So,
I wanted to do that this year.
pardon?
Because Jehovah's Witnesses have a similar thing with like their Easter celebration. They believe that only 144,000 people can partake in the bread and wine, the body and the blood of Jesus. And I wanted to waltz up in their Easter celebration and partake in it, like just chug the wine and shove the bread in my face, and just watch what happens. But alas, COVID-19 happened, so here I am without wine and bread.
Well, I mean, do they believe that the wine and the bread is like the body of Christ and the blood of Christ?
In the Mormon,
Well,
Yep.
it's more like emblems, but it's not like the Catholics who actually, some who believe in Eucharist, where they believe that it's the actual blood and the actual body of Christ.
Yeah. So
Do they practice foot washing?
No.
Because in the Amish community, they have this twice a year. They have their Ordnungsmeeting, which is where they have a Dienelversammlung. They have all the ministers and bishops and deacons of the community come together for a day or two, and they go over the Ordnungsbrief, which is their written list of their rules, and they update that. And then they have a really long church that lasts about from 9 until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then 2 weeks later, they'll have their Großme, which is their kind of like communication. I don't know what you would call it outside of their language. But they do pass around 1 cup for the entire church, has to take a sip of wine from a cup and a piece of bread from a loaf of bread. And they do foot washing. They wash their neighbor's foot, and they kind of do it all in the same tub of water, and it's kind of gross and disgusting and unsanitary.
The first time I saw foot washing was in a Christian denomination outside of the Jehovah's Witness organization, but no, they don't practice that at all within the cult at all.
no.
Go ahead, Cal. Do you want to jump in here?
So one of the things I was going to say, actually, it does pertain to the last question we were going through. Still in the child sex. I'm sorry, I didn't get a chance to
No,
jump.
you're fine. Go ahead.
But I was going to say, Sam did mention the Boy Scouts, and something that I don't know how common knowledge it is, but the Boy Scouts of America is pretty much entirely run by the LDS Church. And I think they do actually have no higher up scout, no older scout is allowed to be alone with a child. I vaguely remember that being a thing towards the end of my experience with them. I got kicked out of the Boy Scouts after I lost my totem chip for the 3rd time, but that's a long story. But oh man, I'm sorry, my train of thought just absolutely disappeared.
So, Cal, the Mormon Church is no longer associated with the Boy Scouts.
Are they not?
2018, they announced they were disassociating. And my guess is because all this sex abuse was on the horizon and was to be revealed. So 2019, December of 2019, they completely separated. So there's no Boy Scout program, which I see as a problem, because at least the Boy Scouts have those policies you're talking about and all this really good, excellent training that they had developed. So anyway, they're no longer associated.
So, and it does kind of go with that thing where, like I was saying earlier, with the kind of sexist divide, where the men are always doing the outdoorsy kind of stuff. A lot of that was, with the Boy Scouts. But I was basically kicked out of the Boy Scouts and had left the church before 2018. But no, I was kind of young back then. I don't remember a whole lot, but I do remember that there was a period where just a whole bunch of sex abuse cases came out in the Boy Scouts. And because of that, they instituted that whole, you do need to have at least 2 adults with, every kid, which is a good step. And, it is a shame that they haven't instituted that in the church itself. But the problem with the church itself is, even if they do, it's still 2 adult men, and it could potentially be with a young woman. So, the church has a long way to go in terms of their gender equality. As Sam said, me as a 14-year-old with the Aaronic priesthood, which was, it's the lowest kind of priesthood you can hold. Even me with that, in the eyes of the LDS Church, I am infinitely higher in terms of importance to the world than any woman.
Speaking of that goes on to our next
Can I make a
question.
comment about the foot washing?
Go ahead. Sure.
Okay, so in the Mormon Church, yes, they do have foot washing as part of a very sacred ordinance that's secret. I didn't even know about it until just a few years ago, and most members of the church don't know about it. In the temple, you receive what's called the first anointing. You receive a thing called the Endowment. It's a ceremony, and you can watch that on YouTube if you want. It's kind of weird, but the second anointing is what most people don't know about. The second anointing happens with very high ups in the Mormon Church, or if you've given the Mormon Church a whole bunch of money. It happens in the temple, and as part of the ceremony, your feet are washed by an apostle, and then, or was it? You know what? I can't remember who does the foot washing. It may be the man's wife, and then he later washes her feet, something like that. But here's what the second anointing guarantees you. It is you're guaranteed to get into the highest degree of heaven as long as you don't murder anybody. You can commit any other atrocity on earth except murder, and you get into heaven because you have received your second anointing and your feet have been washed. So, Carl, you probably didn't even know that foot washing
I
is
didn't.
a thing that's kind of secret that occurs in the temple, and you get into VIP heaven. I'm going to VIP hell, and I will never have my feet washed, but
I did the last time I was on. I did talk about because I left when I was probably just before I was 13, and I did talk last time about the baptisms for the dead and just how remarkably cultish that whole scenario is, especially with the symbology, the iconography with the bowls, and the fact that you're doing baptisms for someone who is long since dead. So I did talk about that, but for those of you, Sam did mention this, for those of you who are curious, there are a couple of apostates, I guess, on YouTube who wear secret, hidden cameras into the temple and kind of show off, the handshakes that Sam was talking about. There's a bunch of really peculiar things, and the church kind of does a good thing by not letting everyone know about this because it's very cultish. But you go into special rooms of the temple, and the whole time you're wearing your special temple clothes, you're doing secret handshakes, you're, reciting special codes and whatnot. And there is a lot of that available on YouTube if you look up kind of exposés of the temples and the hidden camera stuff.
Go ahead.
During those 23 days of the hunger strike, every night we did something and had a lot of victims, a lot of victim survivors talk. One day I decided to do a washing. And so standing in front of the camera, I expressed my disgust at being associated with the filth that is happening in my church. I was a member of the church at that point in time, the filth of what is happening to our children behind closed doors. So I stripped on camera. I had a swimming suit on, and I poured water over me and, kind of washed myself, symbolically washing myself of this filthy practice that I'm associated with by being a member of the church. Then I invited anybody. I put down a little tray. I had a bunch of water, and I did change out the water every time I did this, then asked for anyone who felt shame or damage from what happened to them as children to come sit in the chair, and I'll wash your feet and symbolically say I'm washing. I can't really take away the shame that you felt as a child and all the damage that's done, but I want you to know symbolically that we would like to participate in taking away, washing away the shame, the self-loathing that you have felt. And I tell you, during those 23 days, that one received, and I felt awkward doing this. I've never done anything like this before. I thought it might come across as cheesy or something, but people really, that people were touched that this gathering would go out of our way to symbolically recognize the shame, the damage, that it wasn't their fault, what happened to them. Anyway, so I did participate in a foot washing that was a marvelous experience.
Thank you for sharing that, Sam.
Okay.
I want to get you, Mary. Why don't you start off? Go ahead and say what you're going to say, but I want you to also start us off on what your cult's views were on women and what leadership roles.
Okay, so you might have to remind me of what your cult's views on women in leadership roles was.
Okay.
Because, so for me, like, in my experience, like what you're talking about here, like, for example, my bishop blamed me for being sexually assaulted as a child. And so that's in direct, like, what you're in that consideration. It's unheard of for a bishop to like actually sit there and do something and symbolically say like this was not your fault. So that is a big deal, and thank you for doing that, because I'm sure that really helps some of those people. I appreciate hearing that. I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you very much.
But I've never heard of anything like that happening within an Amish leader doing that for the victims of a sexual crime. It's more or less.
And I think it was even more meaningful because of the time I was a bishop.
Yes.
Mormon Church, once you're named a bishop, you're a bishop, even though you don't have a constitution.
So, same in the Amish Church. If you're a bishop until you're dead.
Yeah. Okay. Same thing in the Mormon Church.
Same as a minister, deacon, like you cannot be removed from that power. And another thing is like an Amish bishop, for example, like you will have judges that will literally give, and they have done this ever since Wisconsin versus Uter happened, is they will give bishops like the control of like how they punish their members and how they do this. And they will allow bishops to have complete control over criminal acts. Absolutely unacceptable.
Yeah.
And so bishops hold a lot of power in the Amish church nowadays. They did not historically before that happened, but they do now. Because before that happened, the church would have a disagreement and then they would split. And now they don't have so many splits. They don't have what they call the schism. They don't have that. That doesn't happen. So, going back to the question, what was your cult's views on women in leadership roles?
Yeah.
Well, what leadership roles are we talking about?
Were women able to occupy any type of leadership roles? Or maybe we should start there, because I know.
Let me tell you where an Amish woman is not. She is not a part of the ministry. Any decision she makes in church business should be aligned with her husband, her brother, her father, whatever man is making decisions for her in life. And matter of fact, my mom was a widow. So my biological father was killed when I was 5. And we lived in her home community for about 2 years. And during that period of time, we lived in this house. And they had men set up to manage the money that the church gave her so that we wouldn't starve. And the community gave us so much liver that to this day, I still cannot stand the smell of liver, the taste of liver. Like that was sometimes like the only food we had to eat was literally lard and flour mixed together and ribs. So I hate that stuff. It is disgusting. So do women have leadership roles? No, absolutely not. They were much like the Mormon women, taught to like cook, clean, keep a garden, keep the house, take care of children, and however many boys you had, that was kind of like your value. If you were a woman who had like 14 girls, well, there must have been something wrong with you because God did not bless you with a with a boy. Sorry. And not to mention, like, if, like, for example, one of my rapists would do this manipulative stuff where he would go and he would throw a fit because he did not want to do this thing that he was supposed to do, whatever kind of work it was. And he would do that. And then they would make me go do his fucking job because he didn't want to do it.
Wow.
Like just stuff like that. Like you have no autonomy. You are nothing. You are supposed to be a subservient woman, not look at men in the eyes. You're supposed to provide this other part of it where you give men all the power.
Well, you know what? I have to, Linda. Leads me to a segue to the Jehovah's Witnesses view of women in leadership roles, and she says women in the JW cult are the effing underdog, which is probably an understatement. Like you're saying, similarly, Mary, your value in the Jehovah's Witness organization as a woman is pretty much whether or not you're attached to a man or not.
Right.
What I mean, if you're not married, then that I mean, it's almost like a I don't know. Help me out here,
So,
Emma.
so is it like if you're not married, the community kind of looks down on you and doesn't treat you the same? Like that is the same in the Amish community as well.
Yeah,
They
um, kinda like we had that. That first of all, in in my town, we had very limited like young JWs because I don't know reasons. But basically, the thing is, even married women were looked down upon if they acted in ways like there was a woman and like a young married couple, and her husband was an elder, which is in the kingdom who ranks the top dog, and basically she would sometimes have her hand on his shoulder and stuff like that while answering questions during the studies, and in like the car groups they would like not shame her and say how much of a whore she is for like pawing her goddamn husband, which is like she didn't paw him, she just put her arm around him publicly. And I used to have I'm asexual, by the way, so it always makes sense in this information, but basically I used to have like literal panic attacks tied to marriage and sex because sex seemed like invasive and intrusive to me. Like I just wanted nothing to do with it. And back then, obviously, I was brainwashed into thinking that everyone is just heterosexual. And obviously, that did not do me any good in realizing that that panic is not supposed to be there when you think about a relationship. It's not healthy and it's not natural. And basically, it's a whole lot of stuff about women cannot be louder than men. Like if you laugh at a man's like there were some boys we used to hang out with parental supervision, of course, and when they told a joke and we laughed, after it was only us and our parents, we would be scolded for laughing around boys and acting like we're little whores. Like,
Oh, did you laugh too loud?
well, did I?
I
Well,
mean,
it looks like David is trying to help us out in the comments here. He said women are viewed and spoken of as a large army in the Jehovah's Witnesses, yet women are never allowed to give individual public talks, which are sermons. They're not allowed to become elders, ministerial servants, which are like deacons or, you know, bishops.
right.
Submissiveness was pushed. Let's see. Patricia says that you're so right. We were told to be good little women and don't disagree or try to be anything important. David again says that a Jehovah's Witness woman is never allowed to sit with and accompany another Jehovah's Witness sister in a judicial meeting. It's all a big boys club.
Right. And they didn't have women. Like when the minister and the deacon came to talk to me, there was nobody with me. So it's like two men outside in the dark with me. And that's it. Like you're not allowed to band together. You're also not supposed to question whatever a man tells you. You're not supposed to look at them in the eye and like ask for permission to do things like, oh, can I go talk to this person?
We go more in depth about our Jehovah's Witness experience. I didn't mean to cut you off, Mary.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to say that we go more in depth about our experience. We did a live recently about feminism and misogyny and how women are treated in the Watchtower. So you might want to check out our last episode. So you said, Mary, no leadership positions at all, mostly subservient type positions. Cal, I think you were beginning to talk about how women are treated in the Ex-Mormon church. If you're still there, Cal. Or
sorry about that.
No, you're fine.
I don't know about the Exmo, but
not Ex-Mormon, but Mormon church. Sorry.
In the church itself, so it's one of those things where, you know, with yourself and the Jehovah's Witness, you know, a church can make all the claims they want that women are an army or women are important or women are, you know, whatever. But it really comes down to just how they honestly look at it. Because in the LDS church, it's like, yeah, you know, women are important. But then you have to kind of ask yourself, well, what are they important for? Because in the eyes of the LDS church, it's pumping out babies and making sure the house is clean. And, you know, just they'll say women are important. But again, like I said, me as a 14-year-old was more important to the eyes of God in the LDS church than, you know, a mother of 5. Sam, if you'd like to jump in there with that, if you have a different view or...
No, I've got the same view. Now, in the Mormon church, the men only receive the priesthood. The boys receive the priesthood.
Yeah.
Now at age 11. So they have the power and authority to act for God. Women don't have that. All the leadership positions that are substantial are men only holding the priesthood. Mm-hmm. Now, women can hold responsibilities and pretty responsible things. Like you have what is called the Relief Society president. That is basically the women's organization in the church. So in each of the congregations, you have a woman, the bishop asks a woman, calls a woman to hold that title, the Relief Society president, and she's in charge of the women's organization. But you won't have women presiding or supervising anything with regards to, or having power with regards to men. The other thing that's common, or that you have the children's organization, that is always run by a woman. And so she does have some authority over the boys from age, 2.5 up until age 11, that she would be supervising the teaching and programs for. But as far as the leadership in the ward, the region, the general leadership, anything that is substantive, the women have nothing to do with. It's all men. Now, there is kind of an exception to that, in that the men recognize the women are much better at doing things, and you can pawn things off to them. So when you're planning an activity, you give the women all the hard stuff to do, and you kind of show up. Not too long ago, maybe 5 years ago when I was still involved, I can remember one of the boys, so you've got the boys and girls organization for the youth, ages 11 to 17, and the boys were given, they had an activity coming up. And so they're parsing up which things the boys and girls are going to do. And this 17-year-old kid, he said, well, we always give the women the stuff that takes work to do. So, yeah, the women are looked at, man, if we need something done, we give it to them, but we're in charge of it.
Yeah. So, you know, here in my neighborhood, by the way, I'd like to say one thing real quick, and that's David Wickland. Your perception of Mormonism, 100% correct. Multi-level marketing, huge thing down here in Southern Utah. And because Mormons all have a large amount of kids, it makes it a little bit easier to kind of pawn stuff off, especially due to the predatory nature of MLMs. That being said, also, yes, Duke, LDS, Latter-day Saints, and 11-year-old priests. Yeah, we get, you know, your first priesthood very young. You're baptized at 8, and then I believe, at 11 you get the Aaronic, and then you work up from there. And yes, even the 11-year-olds are more important in the eyes of the church than most women, almost all of them. But oh my God, it happened again. What was I talking about? Sam, you was talking about the yeah. Okay, so here in my neighborhood, with a large majority LDS, I believe everyone in my neighborhood is an LDS member. Very often we would have like these big street parties almost, where everyone would gather up at, the guy with the biggest house in the neighborhood or the biggest backyard. You'd gather up and we'd all have a big old party. And that whole thing is all going to be organized, any potluck, anything. It's all women going to be doing all the cooking. They're going to be making all the invitations. They're going to be setting up all the chairs and everything. It's all done by the women. The most work I recall doing in the LDS church is in two scenarios. And the first is, fathers and sons when you're out camping. And then the second is a very fond memory for a lot of ex-Mormons, and that's at the end of conference when the boys all go around and pick up all the chairs in the back part of the sacrament meeting. So you're trying to impress the women by picking up 6 chairs at the same time, or the best part.
That sounds pretty much. I mean, the women, we did the cooking and the cleaning, and when it was big, we had to cook for the brothers when they had, any type of quick bills, building projects or anything like that.
Yeah.
But you know what? We're at like almost at the end of our stream. We have like 15 minutes left. I just wanted to see. This is actually your question, Mary. What is your former cult's view on the end times? Doomsday?
I always love hearing about doomsday cults, not gonna lie.
Now, I'm not aware of any end times doctrines for Mormons.
No, as far as we don't have we're not, as from what I know about the Jehovah's Witnesses, from what I understand about y'all's a little bit more intense. The most I ever got experience to it, Sam, maybe you have more as a longer member of the church, but one of the biggest things was like I was saying earlier, where the quorum or the apostles will send out an advisory statement in conference. One of the ones that came up a while back was that every Mormon should have what they call food storage with however many days worth of food and supplies in it. So it's kind of, from my understanding, a little bit like a diet doomsday cult. It's just kind of being prepared in the event that something does happen. Other than, Judgment Day, I can't think of anything extreme that the LDS Church does. Sam,
because pretty much, Jehovah's Witnesses can almost be considered a doomsday cult. It's pretty dark. It gets pretty dark.
Consider that, and I'll tell you why.
Okay, go ahead.
So, number one, the name of the Mormon Church is the Church of Latter-day Saints. So we believe we're in the last days before Christ comes back, that he's coming back any minute. We all thought he was coming back in the year 2000. He's coming back any minute. He's coming back soon, but that is literally embedded in the Mormon Church's name, Latter-day Saints. Number two, when Christ comes, guess what? Every single one of us on this podcast, we're going to be burned to a crisp. Only the righteous people are going to remain on this earth to accept Jesus Christ. Well, actually, you're probably all righteous people, but I'm not. I've been condemned to hell. So when Christ comes, we're going to be burned to a crisp. But not only that, in the Mormon Church, you're only getting into heaven if you pay 10% of your income to the church. And if you don't do that, when Christ comes, and this is in our scriptures, you're going to be burned to a crisp. So frequently people, members of the church joke, do you have your fire insurance? Well, your fire insurance is that you paid your full up on your tithing money. So I don't know. That sounds pretty doomsday to me. You better pay up now or you're going to be burned up. You're going to your burning. So
it is pretty dark. Now, Mary, you said it's similar?
This is eerily similar. So first off, if you don't participate in their groskmi, that's like that can keep you out of heaven when the judgment day happens. And you hear about this, like they always talk about it. It's like, so den ewige Feuer brenne sie in die Welt. When Jesus comes back, so there's going to be eternal fire and burning. And I think the English word is maybe like when Jesus comes back, like it'll be like Judgment Day. And they're supposed to tithe 10%. They're supposed to do all of those things. And like if you didn't participate in the gross meal, like there's like little hope that your soul can go to be in heaven with Jesus. Just kind of like this is weird. This is really weird. Sorry.
If I may, real quick.
Yeah.
So Sam, once again, this is showing how poor of a guest I am. Just given how little experience I had. But, in the younger parts of the church, things like the young men's and young women's and all that, I was always told that, at the end times when you die or whatever, the Mormon church doesn't believe in hell. There's no hell. They call it outer darkness is what they call it. And it's when you die, if you don't get into, there's 3 tiers of heaven, by the way. I don't know if anyone's ever covered that on the show. There's 3 tiers of heaven, terrestrial, celestial. Sam, what's the third one? I can't remember.
Telestial.
Telestial, that's the one. So there's 3 tiers of heaven, and basically, how far, how good you are in the church and how good of a person you are determines what, gate of heaven you get into. But if you don't get into that, you go to what's called outer darkness. You go to, they described it as absolute solitude. You're alone forever. Now, I don't know if maybe later in the church, once you've gone into the temple and stuff, if they preach something different, but that's always what I was taught was that the Catholics, they have hell, 9 tiers of hell for different punishments, and it's eternal pain forever. But in the Mormon church, it was always taught you don't go to hell, you go to outer darkness.
Okay, so we have other questions planned. But since we're short on time, I want to go actually just jump into the comments because it looks like our audience has a few questions here. So this one is for you, looks like, Mary. In the Amish community, do they marry more than one wife?
No.
Okay. And we learned that for those watching, let me know if I get this right, Cal and Sam, that the FLDS church engages in polygamy, not the LDS church.
And I did talk about
the LDS church does.
Yeah, I talked about them last time. I can give a quick rundown again of them. So here where I live in southern Utah, we get a lot of the FLDS, and they are largely based in places like Colorado City, just to the east of where I live. But the FLDS, and there's, by the way, I should mention, there's more than one FLDS. If you go on Wikipedia even, there's a whole, you can find articles hither and yon about all the different offshoots of the Mormon church. And a lot of the offshoots of the LDS church do practice polygamy. One of the biggest ones right now is the Fundamental Latter-day Saints, headed up by Warren Jeffs, who I believe is currently still in prison for practicing polygamy. The FLDS, one of the problems with them is they have an issue, much like what Mary talked about last time, where they have a lot of inbred problems, because the whole thing with the FLDS is it's a very tight-knit community. They live in compounds. All of the local, police and services, they're all FLDS. Everyone in the whole community is FLDS. And they don't get a lot of people from the outside, so you get just so much inbreeding there. And I used to work at a Walmart where I would just see all these FLDS coming in, and you could tell the ones where it's just like they're so, you feel really bad because they didn't have a choice for it. And they have, certain things where you can just really tell that they're so inbred over these however many years. David there did just mention, he is still in prison. So I'd also like to just say really quick, I believe your name is Patricia. I appreciate your input throughout this show. I liked hearing what you had to say. And I'm sorry about that sleepover thing. That's weird. That's really weird. Really hope it didn't
Patricia is also asking, do the Mormons still go door to door asking for money?
Well, they do, but only to Mormons. Now, I think during early in the pandemic, they were still doing that. They send the kids out to ask for money from members of the church door to door, and it's specifically to feed the hungry. Who knows where the hell it goes, because they have on the tithing, so we can do anything what we want with this money, even though it says this money's for the poor. I don't know if they still do during the pandemic. By the way, the Mormon Church does, the LDS Church does still believe in polygamy. They don't believe in practicing it on earth anymore. Back in the early 1900s, you had to, if you wanted to get into the highest heaven, you had to have at least 3 wives. That was preached commonly, but they disavowed all that back in the early 1900s. But today, the Mormons believe that there will be polygamy in heaven. So the head of the Mormon Church, the person they consider the prophet, that speaks directly with God, he has been married twice. His first wife died. He's now been remarried. He will be at least with those 2 wives in heaven. The next guy in line, he also has 2 wives who will be within heaven. In fact, the Mormon Church, when I was growing up, they don't focus on this very much anymore, but when I was growing up, you were going to live polygamy with many women. Now, since I was excommunicated, that basically means that my wife will be given to somebody else in heaven. So she'll get some new guy along with a bunch of polygamous wives in heaven. My kids will be given a different father because their dad's down in outer darkness living with Satan. And really, kind of my prayer these days, every time I offer prayer, I pray that God will allow me to take a flashlight with me after I die, because I'm going to outer darkness. Anyway, so yes, the Mormon Church absolutely believes in polygamy after this.
Okay, we got a couple questions for Mary. Linda wants to know how long you were Amish.
19 years, 10 months, 3 weeks, and 6 days.
And David wants to know what's the difference between Amish and Mennonites?
Mennonites. So the Amish history, I think I talked about this a little. I don't remember if it was here or not. Basically, way back when they were in Europe, the Mennonites started by a man named Menno Simmons, who became disgruntled with the Catholic Church and infant baptism. He didn't agree with that, so he started what is now known as the Mennonites today. And then the Amish people, the briefest way that I can explain this is like he didn't think that the Mennonites were being conservative enough. And so it was no longer the issue of infant baptism. It was more or less the issue of like they're not conservative enough. And so then he and his group of followers split from the Mennonites and started what is now formally known as the Amish people. And the Amish people immigrated to the United States a couple hundred years ago. And there's over 200,000 of them in North America. The thing about the Amish and Mennonites is there's also many different variations. So like you can have one group that does one thing and another group that does something completely different. It all depends on the varying rules that their ministry and bishop and deacons have set up.
And another question for Mary, how did you get out?
By being a very disobedient girl for a very long time. Because after I had went through all of the things, now my brother did something that wasn't exactly kosher with the church. He has a not Amish friend, and I knew this friend for around 10 years. And one day we were going to the store, and my brother went in the store. I don't know why I was in the truck. I don't remember this. But I said something to him about like some of the horrors that I was living through and how I just want to die. And my friend contacted a crisis center and set me up with therapy. And through that, I eventually ended up being able to remove myself from a very abusive situation with the help of some people I ended up knowing that I wasn't supposed to because I didn't have permission to talk to them.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Mary. Looks like we lost Sam. I was going to go around to get some final thoughts. So I'm gonna wait just a few more minutes. Maybe we can, in the meantime, while I'm waiting to see if he jumps back on. This is a question that one of us had. I don't know if you can start us off, Cal, about outside friends. Like,
Yeah.
were you allowed to have outside friends?
And I believe I did talk about this the last time around. It kind of depends on the family. So here where I live, here in southern Utah, we have, all your friends are in the church just because that's where you are every Sunday. You kind of, just collect them while you're there. When you go to school, most of your friends at school are going to be Mormon just because they also live in southern Utah. Most of your teachers are going to be Mormon because they grew up in southern Utah. So you get just a whole kind of ecosystem of Mormons, and this might be different in other areas where Mormons aren't quite as prevalent as they are in southern Utah. But there's you do kind of get friends that aren't in the church, but two things kind of discourage that. And the first is that sometimes, depending on the family, your parents are going to kind of not want you to associate with them. And then the other thing is they kind of drill into you, how you're supposed to act and how you're supposed to behave and what you're supposed to say. And when you're friends with someone who, say, swears, just because their family isn't LDS and, they're a family that swears, that's a thing that happens apparently. I didn't learn that until I was older. But, when you're 8 and some kid, talks in a way that you're not used to, you just kind of subconsciously don't associate with that person because you've been taught for so long that that's incorrect. I remember, most of my friends back when I was a youngin' were all LDS, and I had this one friend. I remember one time when he said, "God damn," and boy, how did that shake me to the core. So, hey, Patricia, shout out from St. George, Utah. It's a shithole here. I hope you're not here anymore. Sucks. So hot. It's almost October and it's still like 35 degrees Celsius here.
I don't know if Mary, you still on the line? Are you still here? I don't know. We'll come back to Mary. So pretty much you were, it varied from church to church whether or not you were allowed friends outside of the church, because as our ex-Jehovah's Witness commenters are commenting, that's an absolutely no. No, we weren't allowed to have friends outside of the church. It wasn't encouraged. As a matter of fact, it was just, discouraged all the time, in articles, in sermons, just all the time.
At school, I had friends fall out with me because they'd come and call for me, and my mum would be like, "No, she's not coming out." So then they'd fall out with me, and I'd be like, "Well, it's not my fault. My mum's not going to let me come and play in the street with you." But I lost friends because of that. And you can't go to any outside friends' school parties, after school activities. No, you as a child, you are completely cut off from having any friends who aren't JWs, and it's horrible to live like that. It makes you feel really lonely.
And I imagine that most cults do that on purpose. They isolate you so that all you have is the church, and that encourages you to stay.
It's also used as a weapon. If you're in the Jehovah's Witnesses, it not only encourages you to stay, you are fearful of leaving because you don't want to lose your whole community. And everybody you've ever known. And if you're born in, meaning that's all you know is the cult, you were raised in the Jehovah's Witness religion, then you're losing lifelong relationships that you can't get back. I mean, because literally not being around other people that we deem as worldly means that you don't have yearbooks to look back on, fond memories in school of being part of clubs, or you didn't go to prom, you don't have college buddies, you don't have reunions to go to because you literally never hung out with these people. You were, even though it's kind of different from Amish, even though you're actually cut off from the community, the Jehovah's Witness community is, even though you're integrated in life, you're still cut off from the community.
Mm-hmm. And if you make friends with kids at school, you then end up being upset because you're taught that these kids are going to die at Armageddon, a horrible death, and be eaten by birds. So even if you do make friends, you're scared then. Like, do I tell them what's going to happen to them? Do I don't? And, that is like not a nice thing to be thinking.
I knew a Jada back in high school, and I only, I wasn't friends with her or nothing, but, back then, when all you know is the LDS church, I met her around when I was actually leaving, but when all you really know religiously is that, you just kind of look at the J-Dubs and you're like, oh, they don't celebrate their birthdays and they don't hug people. It's okay. They're just kind of strange. But then you kind of, when you grow up, you start to realize just, everything that's going on in that church and the systemic, abuse and isolation.
So Mary, you're back. So I would imagine that the Amish communities were not allowed to have outside friends.
No, and I actually got really lucky when I did come forward to a non-Amish person because he did not report it to the church that I did come forward to him, and instead sought a crisis center for me for victims of abuse. And at the end of the day, I have to say this is like, I was really lucky because he was trustworthy and he did not come back to the church and say that, because I know that so because of Wisconsin versus Yoder, we didn't actually have the interactions with non-Amish kids when we were growing up. We went to Amish school. We were taught by a teacher that had an 8th grade education, no formal credentials, no other schooling besides an 8th grade education. That was it. All we had was our Amish community. And so that was really, it's very unsafe to reach out like that to a non-Amish person. Because, for example, I went to hang out with some kids that were not Amish because they invited me to come hang out with them. And I had drank a beer there, and I was like 17. I got in a lot of trouble for that because somebody took a picture and gave it to my ministry. So there's this whole kind of like tattling thing that the non-Amish world does on Amish kids or Amish people. Like, they will go and they will tell the community, the bishop, the deacon, the ministers, somebody, and then they will bring it to you and they will still punish you for it. So when you see Amish youth doing things, doesn't mean that they won't get repercussions for that.
Well, we have a snitch system, but it's within the Jehovah's Witness community. We're trained to snitch on each other to the church, our authorities, in order to so that church discipline can be handed out. We're gonna answer this one last question and then we'll close out. And I don't know if Sam, you want to take this one. David is asking, was smoking an excommunication offense in Mormonism or Amish?
Not excommunication, no.
Yeah, no. I mean, smoking what? A lot of converts. That's the word. A lot of the converts in the LDS church. Some of them, rather impressively, did leave behind smoking habits when they joined. So I knew a couple who used to smoke, and I knew a couple who used to drink a lot. And it is kind of impressive that they did manage to drop that for their church. But if I recall, I think I knew someone who did actually actively smoke while being a member. And it's one of those things. So in the LDS church, you have what's called the Word of Wisdom. And it's something that is preached as the way you're supposed to live your life to, be a good Mormon. And in that is where you hear the famous thing where Mormons can't drink coffee. That's in the Word of Wisdom. It specifically says hot beverages or hot drinks, but it's kind of just commonly associated with teas and coffees. There's a bit of a misconception where people say that Mormons aren't allowed caffeine. It's not that. It's specifically those two beverages, coffee and tea. But I do remember, my grandpa, not a great Mormon, but he used to buy me those green tea iced teas from Starbucks, and he'd be like, yeah, well, the Word of Wisdom says hot beverages. So he kind of acts with the Mormon church kind of the way that really hardcore Jews do, where they just do everything they can to figure out what the rules are and then how to break them without breaking them, if you know what I mean.
Yo.
If anyone has ever heard of the Eruv in the Jewish religion, it's kind of like that. My grandpa's kind of like that kind of guy, but no, it's specific. It's not, you're not going to get excommunicated for smoking or drinking coffee, but you might get a little bit of a talking to from the bishop.
Well, we know that there are some people in the comments actually commenting saying that they were excommunicated or disfellowshipped for smoking. So we know that there's a practice within the Jehovah's Witness religion that people have been excommunicated and shunned for offenses like that. So I just want to say thank you everybody for joining us on this live stream today, and I want to get to our final thoughts. I just want to say thank you for everybody who joined us here on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter and Periscope today with all of your questions. I'm sorry, I noticed that people on Periscope was asking questions and they weren't coming through. I will have to figure out what that is, why that exactly is, before next week. But I just wanted to let you know, for those in the audience, that we did appreciate your comments. We did appreciate your questions and sticking with us this long. I know we're a little over. Sam, did you want to take us away with some final thoughts, or what projects you're working on, or what you want us to take away from this live stream today about Mormonism?
Oh my goodness. Well, let me just start with the projects I'm working on.
Okay.
Our project in 2017 and 2018 was protect LDS children. And I got a lot of feedback that, look, there are a lot of children outside of Mormonism who are being harmed. There's a lot of abuse. There's a lot of sexual abuse. And so I believe that what the Mormons do to their children, asking them sexual explicit question behind closed doors, that alone is child abuse. Do you masturbate to a 12-year-old? That is child abuse right there. But anyway, there's child abuse all over the place. So last year we converted to we did another initiative called Protect Every Child. We climbed mountains all year long, unfurling banners across the world, really at the tops of those mountains, and at the tops of driveways, anywhere you could open up unfurl a banner stating Protect Every Child. So our mission was to raise awareness to this problem that's out there in all, and mostly in churches. We know it's all over the place, but in churches, geez, that's the place that should be a trusted place. We held a march last August. We had 3,200 people come to that march, the first march ever in Protecting Children National March. It was a wonderful event to raise awareness. So we continue in that vein. So that's the project I'm still involved in, but I took 3 years off to do all this away from my livelihood. So this year I'm kind of have jumped back into my livelihood, and then COVID hit. So I've been trying to save my business, and now we're doing it during COVID, but we'll manage. But Protect Every Child along with LDS children is kind of our project today.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Sam. So, Cal, did you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of an outro like I did last time, where I'd like to say that, especially what with Emma's poster she's got there up on the wall, a lot of people, religious or otherwise, even if you out there are agnostic or atheist or, anything else, specifically this time I'm going to say specifically to those who are, with a religion or no longer with a religion that is giving you urges to just not be here anymore. And having been in that spot myself, and other panelists here giving their stories last time about also being in a similar spot, there is the number that Spencer has, I believe, put up on the screen before, that one there. And there is also on Google, if you type in the suicide hotline, you can find a 24-hour chat. I'd like to say again, don't be ashamed and do not be afraid. because those are the two things that stopped me from ever reaching out for help when I was going through tough times. So those are two things you need to keep in mind: is you should never be ashamed for what happened to you, or what may or may not have happened to you, and or where you're at, because sometimes it isn't even due to your surroundings. Sometimes it is just due to genetics. It's believed that my current situation is genetic, and just try and get that help, and there are communities of ex-JDubs, ex-Amish, ex-Mormon. You can find those around. Unfortunately, I kind of wish I was a little bit more active in activism for this kind of community, but Sam here is in a activism for something I'm pretty passionate about, and that's saving kids. So if you have been abused, talk to the law, not your church, because your church is going to try and hide it. If you're feeling like you don't want to be here anymore, reach out for help however you can, in any way you can. Every nation has its own hotlines and chat lines. Find one, because if you do what I did and you feel like you're, one of my common things that I thought back then was, even to the point where when I had a loaded gun in my mouth, I thought, hey, if I talk to this chat line operator, I feel like my problems aren't that big. So I feel like if I talk to them, I'm going to be wasting their time. Don't think that. If you're even getting close to thinking thoughts like that, definitely talk to someone.
Thank you so much, Cal. And Mary, did you have any final thoughts?
I feel like the world needs to address this situation where when Amish victims do come forward, there tends to be this response, like in the example of the prosecutor with the 13-year-old girl that just happened recently, where she was raped by 4 people and he prosecuted them. But he makes this statement that says, in the end, this wasn't a case of a parent and a child where a parent in position of authority sexually abused or exploited their child. This was a situation where 4 siblings engaged in acts with their sisters. I offered a 15-year prison sentence based on this. It was a different relationship. And I made the decision not to send them to the Department of Correction to suspend the sentences. These 2 young men would have been eaten alive in the state prison system. And this is the Webster County prosecuting attorney, Ben Bergstresser. And so my question is like, how is that him engaging in justice for the victim? These people are still walking free. They're still living in the home with the victim. This is unacceptable. Would this be anywhere in any case where this would be acceptable to force somebody to live with their rapist? What happened to me when I was forced to live with my rapist? It got worse. The physical altercations got worse. Everything, the threats, everything. And so this is completely unacceptable. And I encourage everybody to contact this prosecuting attorney. Let him know that this is unacceptable. This is not okay.
Absolutely.
Mary, that's his telephone number right there, right? The number that's flashed across the screen that you gave me.
Hold it. There's something wrong with the number.
There's 5 numbers at the end.
Oh, it is. Oh, sorry. That might be me.
No, that's probably my fault. Okay. Let me go back and look. Nope. Okay. Here it is.
And this is the prosecuting attorney's number?
Yes. This is a prosecuting attorney deciding not to send them to the Department of Corrections. How in any world is this acceptable? How is it justice for that victim?
Okay, so if you resend me the number, I can retype it out.
I did.
Okay, let me get that.
Okay.
And if you're a doubting Jehovah's Witness on this stream today, you are not alone. You have 3 people on this panel. Well, myself, Emma, and Molly, who have come out of the Jehovah's Witness religion. We talked about rampant child sex abuse in another stream, but if you are Jehovah's Witness who have endured abuse, you are not alone. There are people who can advocate, people who can listen, people that can pour into you by way of ex-Jehovah's Witness groups online. There are a number of them on Facebook. There is also a Reddit stream. There is a Reddit, not a Reddit stream, but an XJW Reddit. I think it's really huge. It has almost 30,000 people now. So and you can be anonymous. I know that we had recently a Jehovah's Witness who was coming out of the organization, a PMO, who said that they were encouraged by one of our streams, giving advice on how to leave the organization. So if you are interested in that, we'll go ahead and plug that in there because it has a lot of helplines in there. Emma, you run an ex-Jehovah's Witness group that almost has 6,000 people now.
Just over 6,000 now. Even though we are called Ex-Jehovah's Witnesses Unite, we do also let in like Amish, that's our Mary, Mormons, people that have been parts of any other cults, because we all come from a similar background. People who've got close family or close friends that are Jehovah's Witnesses as well and need some advice, they can join that group, no problem. I've also got another group which I made basically for the public, called What Do Jehovah's Witnesses Believe? And that's just for the public to go in and learn about all the belief systems and the policies, because a lot of people are interested, but because in my group there is PMOs and people trying to fade, we have to be careful who we let in. So I've done the other group especially for the public that just want to go and find out more about Jehovah's Witnesses.
And I have a group too, is Jehovah's Witnesses and Friends, even though it is, if you're in between, we get a lot of people who are interested about Jehovah's Witnesses, a lot of people who are studies. And recently we've been getting a lot of people who are in between, who are still unraveling Jehovah's Witness doctrine. You may not be able to talk about doctrine in other ex-Jehovah's Witness groups to try to break down. So if you're in that in-between stage that you're thinking about leaving the Jehovah's Witness group, we reached about, I think 7,000. And all of us actually have platforms too. Molly, you have your channel on which you're, you can tell, I don't want to tell about your channel. Go ahead and tell about your channel, girl.
Yeah, so basically I said this the last time and I will say it again for any currently religious person and especially any currently member of a cult person. But do we look like we are trying to sell you to the devil? Like, do we look like we are trying to achieve something malicious? Like, we left for various reasons, and some of them personal, yes, and some of them not related to child abuse or any sort of abuse, but all in all, we don't do this because we want to get the fame and glory. Do we look like we're famous and glorious? Come on now. I will be waking up tomorrow at the crack of dawn to work. if this had any money in it or anything, we wouldn't be here, and more people will do this. We do this because we care and we want to help people, and that's why we use our platforms and our voices. And on my YouTube channel I engage in various topics, me being an XJW, me being a queer person, me being diagnosed with Turner syndrome. I discuss all of these topics whenever and however I want to. Like, basically it's a mix of everything that would interest me, from art to science and all that. And this month I did like 8 videos related to suicide and how to prevent and how to assist suicidal people, because I am a suicide attempt survivor, and I believe that that's an important topic to destigmatize and talk about. And I believe that anyone who speaks out about religious abuse, child abuse, sexual abuse, and domestic abuse, and just overall, human rights violations is something that's needed to destigmatize these conversations and make these conversations more accessible to the public, and make people understand that it's not like we're stupid and that's why we end up in a cult. It's that we are at a vulnerable state, or we are born into it, and we don't really have a choice, or if we have a choice, our choice is manipulated to a degree where our choice is not really our choice anymore, but it's like that's how brainwashing works. That's why it's called brainwashing. It washes away your true emotions and true personality until it's gone. And people need to understand.
Well, you can hear more from Molly on her platform. We have our links in. We'll have the links in our in the description. Before we go, Emma, you said you have victim stories that you collect.
Yeah, I've also got a page called Former Jehovah's Witnesses True Stories of Abuse. And what I do is I put victim stories out there. If you come tell me your story, the details you want me to write, it can be anonymous. Lots of people have done it anonymous. And then I publish them on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, just for public awareness. And also it helps some victims, to get their stories off their shoulders, so to say. So yeah, if you've got any stories you want me to tell, any abuse, domestic, mental, physical, that you suffered in the cult, I'll publish it for you and put it out there.
Thank you again, Mary, Cal, and Sam Young. Thank you for joining us today, for trusting our platform, for all of your stories, trusting our platform to be able to get the word out. I also wanted to let you guys know that next week is our break, our self-care break. So we will not be having a live stream next week. But stay tuned before the week after that, where we will be talking about our lives in the coronavirus pandemic. If you're familiar with our live streams, you know that we talked about or gave an overview of the coronavirus. We're going to be a little bit more intimate and talk about how it's been affecting our lives, especially since it's touched one of the Glass Tables panel's members. She's going to talk about her experience with COVID, and we're going to share our stories. And we're actually going to do something a little different and talk about some conspiracies surrounding the virus, and because we've all seen them circulating within the groups and circulating in the internet. So that should be an interesting live stream. And come one, come all. I mean, we want to hear not just our side, we want to hear the other side too.
My grandfather believes a lot of those coronavirus conspiracies.
Oh wow! See, this is the live stream for him. We want to hear from those, and you know what? And I won't give it away. We'll go into depth in.
Hey,
go ahead, Cal.
Really quick, Linda, my condolences for your brother. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yes, our hearts to yours, Linda. Linda is always it's frequently on our live streams. Our heart goes out to you, Linda. As you know, a lot of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses have been touched by suicide, or know of someone who's been committed suicide. So I guess that about wraps us up, unless somebody else has something else to say before we close out.
I don't know how much help I could be, honestly, but if any of you feel the need, feel free to hit me up on Facebook. I reckon I don't have any social media in which I am professional in appearance, because I am not professional in any way. But if you feel the need, I believe that Spencer has put my name up on the Facebook post. So
yeah, it's on the post.
Should you feel the need, feel free to hit me up on Facebook.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and close out. If you can connect with us offline, and I guess we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.